Okay, so that should cover non-adjectives enough, and now we would move on to nouns, but for whatever reason, nouns cannot be used in this grammar construct when it's in the affirmative form. So we can't use nouns when this is a positive sentence, but we can use nouns when this is used in the negative sense. So if this grammar pattern is used in the negative, as in it does not look like, then we can use nouns. But before we cover that, we'll have to restart and cover how to do the negative sense for verbs and adjectives, and then we'll cover nouns at the end. So this is where things get pretty complicated, and we're gonna have to cover these in categories, which is perfect because we're already doing that by separating them into verbs and adjectives and noun subcategories or whatever. So first up, we'll cover how to do verbs in the negative form of this grammar pattern. And in order to do that, we're basically going to do the same thing as we were doing in the positive sense, but instead ofそうです orそうだ, it's going to change toそうにもありません orそうにもない. And the particle ni that is in here is actually going to be optional, so you can use it or you don't have. So you can use it, or you can just drop it completely to change it to so mo nai or so mo arimasen, whatever is to your pleasing basically. So let's cover two examples using verbs in this grammar pattern in the negative form, and for the first one we'll just do the negative version of our first example, our very first example. So instead of 雨が降りそうです, we have now 雨が降りそうにもありません. And this is going to translate to it doesn't look like it's going to rain. So break down the sentence again. It's basically the same thing in the beginning. 雨が降りそう means it looks like it's going to rain. But after that, we have the negation to the grammar pattern. So now we have にもありません, and that is just going to make the so into its negative form. So now it's just going to be it doesn't look like it's going to rain, or it doesn't seem like it's going to rain. For our next example, we have a new line, and that line is このイベントはすぐに始まりそうにもありません. And what this line is saying is just basically it doesn't seem as if this event is going to start immediately, or it doesn't look like this event is going to start right away. Let's break down the sentence bit by bit. First up, we have この, which means this. We have イベント, which means event. We have は marking as the topic of the sentence. We have すぐに, which is going to be an adverb that means immediately or right away. We have the verb hajimaru, which means to start, but we're going to take it and turn it into its primas form. So then if the mas form is going to be hajimarimasu, then we're going to drop the mas at the end, and the primas is just going to be hajimari, and then we're going to add so right after that, just like we've always been doing with all the previous examples to mean it looks like it's going to start, but this time we're going to negate it. And so right after the so, we're going to add that extra part, which is going to be ni mo arimasen or ni mo nai. In this case, it's going to be arimasen because we're going to keep it rather polite. And so if that translates to it doesn't look like it's going to start, we combine that with the rest of the sentence, and altogether it's this event doesn't look like it's going to start right away, or it doesn't look like it's going to start immediately. このイベントはすぐに始まりそうにもありません. Okay, so now with that done, we're going to move on to e-adjectives in the negative form of this grammar pattern. And the distinction that we have for e-adjectives is that you can use one of three options. So in the negative form, instead of using so for e-adjectives, we're either going to use soujyanai, soudewanai, or kunasasou. So it's the third one that should probably be the most foreign at this point. We already know that janai and dewanai are kind of just negation phrases, but in this case, this grammar pattern has that particularly special kunasasou. We can see here that kunai is going to be the negative form of any e adjective basically. We drop that e and add the so right after it, so kunasasou kind of makes sense as well. It's the negative form added with so at the end of it rather than so being in front, followed by janai or dewanai. So now let's go through one example with an e adjective in the negative form of this grammar pattern. For our example sentence, we have the line 今日ジョージワシントンは嬉しそうじゃない or 今日ジョージワシントンは嬉しそうではない or lastly 今日ジョージワシントンは嬉しくなさそう. And these are all going to mean the same thing, just subtly different in the grammatical usage, but definitely the same in meaning. Let's break down the sentence bit by bit. First up, we have 今日, which is going to be today. We have ジョージワシントン, which is George Washington. We have は marking him as the topic of the sentence. We have the e adjective ureshi, which means happy basically. We're going to take the stem of that adjective, so we're going to drop that final e, and so it's just ureshi now. And then we're going to add one of the three options that we have. So ureshi soujanai works, ureshi soudewanai works, or lastly ureshi kunasasou. And so yeah, you can use any one of those to mean the exact same thing, and what that meaning is going to be is it doesn't look like George Washington is happy, or it doesn't seem as if George Washington is happy. Of course, note that in using soujanai or soudewanai, we could easily replace the nai with arimasen as well if we're being polite, but that was just kind of omitted because we should already know that as common knowledge at this point. Okay, so next up we're covering not adjectives in the negative form of this grammar pattern, and the guidelines are kind of similar to the negative form of the e-adjectives, but in this case we know that not adjectives in their negative form are differently conjugated than e-adjectives, in which for e-adjectives we already know that you add kunai after the stem of the e-adjective to turn into its negative, but for not adjectives we don't do that because the stem is the same as the word itself. All we do is add dewanai or janai or ja arimasen or dewa arimasen. That's going to reflect in this guideline for this grammar pattern in the negative form. So for not adjectives in the negative form of this grammar pattern, we have 4 options this time. Instead of using soul, which would be used in the positive form, in this negative form we're either going to do soujyanai, soudewanai, ja nasasou, or dewa nasasou. Then after those phrasings, we would probably add des right after to end the sentence. Unless we were conjugating them into the polite arimasen, then we would not use des or da in that case. It depends on which route you go, basically. So kind of confusing, so let's go through an example to get a better glimpse of this. So for our example, we have the line この仕事は簡単. Then this is where we're going to pause, and then we're going to decide which of these 4 options we want to use, because we can use any of them to mean the exact same thing. So we could do kantan soujanai, kantan soudewanai, kantan ja nasasou, or kantan dewa nasasou. Then we would add des right after any of those, unless we already conjugated the nai into arimasen instead, such as, for example, kantan sou ja arimasen. Then we wouldn't need the des there. If you need a refresher on why that is, check out the previous videos on that. And so yeah, we have the line この仕事は簡単そうじゃない as an example. We're choosing just a random one of the 4. And what is that going to translate to? It's going to be something along the lines of, it doesn't look like this job is simple. It doesn't seem as if this job is simple, or it doesn't seem as if this job is easy. No matter which of the 4 options you choose, that's what it's basically going to translate to. And so let's break down the sentence just to do a quick rundown. We have kono, which is this. We have shigoto, which is job. So this job, wa, marking it as the topic of the sentence. We have the not adjective kantan, which means simple or easy. Then we're going to modify that with the negative form of this grammar pattern, which is going to mean it doesn't look like it's easy, or it doesn't seem as if it's easy. And that's going to be soujanai or soudewanai or dewa nasasou or ja nasasou. And so altogether, it doesn't look as if this job is easy. この仕事は簡単そうじゃない. Then the des or the da, depending on whatever kind of politeness or casualness you want to be. And so now we're finally at the final part of this lesson, and that is doing this negative form of this grammar pattern with nouns. And remember that we can't use nouns in the positive form of this grammar pattern, so only if it's in the negative for whatever reason. If you use it in the positive form, then that's just going to be ungrammatical, non-grammatical. So usually for most grammar patterns, when we do nouns, they usually follow the same guidelines as not adjectives, because they technically have a very similar structure in that the stem form of them is just basically the word itself. And so it's not surprising that they would share the same guidelines for particular grammar patterns. However, that's not the case this time around. In not adjectives, we had 4 options to choose from, but for whatever reason, when we're using nouns, it decreases to just 2, half of those options that we had earlier. So you're probably wondering if it's the half that has soul in the beginning that it gets eliminated, or the half that has soul at the end that gets eliminated. Well, the answer is that it's the easier one, which has soul at the beginning. So for nouns in the negative form of this grammar pattern, we can't use soujyanai or soudewanai. Our only options are ja nasasou or dewa nasasou, and that's kind of more complicated, because if we were just trying to remember this grammar pattern easily, we could just know that the negative is the same thing as the positive, followed by the extra janai or the dewanai to negate it. But in this case, we have to do ja nasasou and dewa nasasou for nouns in the negative form of this grammar pattern. So that might be complicated, but let's go through an example to cement that idea, hopefully. So for our example sentence, we're going to keep it simple. We're just going to say simply, that person doesn't look like a teacher. So in Japanese, あの人は先生, pause, and now we choose one of our two options. じゃなさそう or ではなさそう, whichever one we want to choose. Let's just choose じゃなさそう. So あの人は先生じゃなさそう. And add the des after that if you want to be polite. So what does that translate to? It translates to it doesn't look like that person's a teacher, or it doesn't seem as if that person's a teacher. And yeah, that's basically the really easy translation. We could have used ではなさそう as well, and it would have meant the same thing, but we could not have used そうじゃない or そうではない. That's just non-grammatical when we're using nouns for whatever reason, and that's just the way you're gonna have to remember it. And so yeah, あの人は先生じゃなさそう or ではなさそう is it doesn't look like that person is a teacher, and that's how we use the negative form of this grammar pattern with nouns. And with that, we can finally wrap up this lesson. Hopefully it gave a good idea of how to use this. It's a really frequent grammar pattern. People are very often saying things look like things are happening, or it looks like something is adjective. And of course the opposite is also true in that it doesn't look like something is an adjective, or it doesn't look like something is doing something. And yeah, pretty valuable lesson. And in our next video we will probably cover another grammar pattern that uses the phrasing soul but has a different meaning. So make sure you get a good idea of this one, because if it's hard right now, then it's probably going to be even more so when you're constantly mixing it up with another grammar pattern that has the same phrasing. And yeah.